Hello and welcome to our latest Meet the Adopter webcast. Our guests tonight are adopters Kathy and Scott and Joan, who's an independent social worker and trainer. Thank you for all the questions that have come through to us so far. If you'd like to join the conversation this evening, it's not too late. You can tweet at First for Adoption using the hashtag Meet the Adopter, or you can email socialmedia@firstforadoption.org.uk. Over the next half hour or so, we'll be exploring the stressful period when adopters are waiting to be matched with their children. For some adopters, matching happens quickly. Others find that they wait longer. As you may know, over the last year or so, we found ourselves in an unusual situation in England. There are fewer children with a plan for adoption, and at the same time, there are more people who have been approved to adopt. This has resulted in adopters waiting for months to be matched with a child. Kathy is one of those adopters. She was approved to adopt in October 2014, but is still waiting to be matched. Kathy, thanks for joining us, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that we hope you don't have to wait too much longer. If we can, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like you to cast your mind back to the beginning of all this. When and how did you decide that you'd like to adopt?
I think it wasn't an immediate decision when I was a lot younger. I went through lots of processes of trying to conceive naturally. It didn't happen. And then my mind just kept casting over to adoption. Being an adopted adult myself, it resonated with me that it felt natural to take that as the next step.
So you didn't have that barrier that people maybe who weren't adopted would sometimes have, thinking, oh, I'm somehow settling for adoption because I'm not able to conceive a birth child.
No, absolutely not. And in a way, it feels like I haven't had like that grieving period or that loss, but I haven't missed it because it just felt like it was very natural for me to consider adoption. I think being adopted myself at just 9 days old, it just felt right. It just felt like a natural progression, really, from that point of view. And then I would say I heard about Quorum, and I joined there, and that was just after the process had changed to a 2-stage process. So that was quite attractive, really, in the way that was.
So you say you were adopting through Quorum?
Yes.
Was that your first choice, or did you shop around, as it were, a little bit before you arrived with Quorum?
A few years previous, I had gone to another agency, and they'd asked me to go away and do a bit of reflection and think it through, and that was. I then had a break of about 3 years, and then from there I went to Quorum. So yeah.
And was there something about Quorum as an agency that felt right for you? What was it that decided you that you would go with them?
Well, definitely. I heard about them because when I was working, there was a lady who had adopted with her partner through Quorum in London, and she absolutely praised the service that she'd had and the support that she'd had, and that's where I first heard of them from there. And then I made the initial contact around about February 2014, and then started the process from there.
So we're always told, aren't we, by marketing people, that there's nothing like a personal recommendation.
Oh, word of mouth.
In this case, especially for something
Absolutely.
as intimate and important as adoption. That
absolutely, so important.
You that, yeah. So it's been, 18 months now since you were approved adopter. And how's that wait been?
It's sometimes it's been difficult. I think after I was first approved, I was expecting it to be a lot quicker. I think at the time of my approval, there hadn't been such a big change with the number of children that were available. So my mindset was that it would probably happen quite fast, certainly within 6 months. And I think then you hear the news, you join the forums, and the reality starts to kick in, just how difficult this part of the process is. If anything, day one after approval has been the most difficult part of the whole thing. However, I have discovered the fact that during this waiting period, it's really kind of helped me to get a clearer picture of the sort of child that I would like to adopt as well. How I've kept myself busy and what I've been doing during that period has kind of like changed some of that thought process a little bit. So it's been quite interesting.
So has it changed then over the last 18 months? Did you have what kind of an idea? Because it's a strange notion for anybody who hasn't adopted themselves or isn't involved with adoption, this idea of almost, well, you imagine a child, that people who have birth children coming into their families, a child arrives and you hope perhaps that it might look like one or both of us. But for an adopted child, you're almost quite literally in some cases ticking or crossing boxes. How did you feel about And how did you manage to? Did you have strong ideas about it?
It's really difficult because I kind of feel like a little bit of a fraud when it comes to talking about this, because if I was pregnant and I was giving birth naturally, I don't have any choice. You don't choose a boy or a girl, you don't choose features or anything like that. So when it comes to saying, well, what preference do you have for a child, it feels really uncomfortable to talk about. Yes, I do have a preference. I would say that preference was for a little girl up to the age of 5. I originally started at the age of 3, would be because in my mind, 18 months ago, I was thinking, well, by the time I finished adoption leave, that would be round about school age. However, now, during this last 18 months, it's completely changed. But the reason I say, why do we want a girl, I have no rational justification for that other than I'm a girl. So I wouldn't rule out a little boy, but my preference always seems to have been for a girl. But I still feel that's all for the wrong reasons anyway, but it's still a preference.
So it feels like although you've identified that a girl might be, you have as a girl yourself, you have certain attributes that would help in forming a relationship with that little person. You wouldn't rule out a boy.
No, I know, because the reason is girls like cooking, boys might like cooking, girls might want to play football, and it's for all the reasons I've told myself, I can talk myself out of that, which is
I'd like to bring in Joan here. Joan is somebody who's worked for a very long time with adopters and their families. This idea, going back to this idea of matching, which is scary and feels in many ways artificial. Can you explain a little bit about how the process works, what we mean by matching? Because I suppose there's an assumption that everybody watching knows what we mean by matching. What does it mean?
So what you have are the child's profile will be either placed in different areas in order for adopters or adoption links to be happening. And that might be through the adoption register or through consortium or through various different means. And the social worker for the child, and in some agencies it's going to be an adoption social worker who's in charge of doing that family finding, will be looking for those matches that come in. The child will have quite definitive needs that are there that we know about. And it may be, for some children, the need to be with a particular child or with their sibling. That might be a particular need. So we look at those needs, and then we look and see the families that are coming in, and can they actually meet those needs? It's really hard for the prospective adopters not to take this process personally, because it can feel that people are judging me. But the reality is that we look at those needs and try to match them up as best as possible.
And Kathy talked about how she came to a flexible idea that she might like to adopt a little girl, but she's still open to whoever might come along. What other considerations should people in the process of adopting take into account when they're thinking about matching?
From the family perspective, or from the child? From the family perspective, one of the first things that you're going to see about a family is the profile. We do not get the PAR until that's actually expressly asked for. So the profile is actually more important than you think that it is. So in the first bit, we'll just make sure it's well written, because sometimes it's all over the place. And if it's becoming complicated to read it, people don't quite know what's being put on offer here. So the things that we're looking at are that people have the emotional time and energy to be able to do that real job of reparenting children who have been traumatized.
So you're talking about this again, an unusual thing to be asked to do, but it's almost like a CV or a job application. It's flagging up the fact, the attributes you feel that you have as a potential adopter, which will help you be a good parent for that child or children.
Yeah. So quite often when you're reading them, people will say, work in the city, or I do this, and we enjoy doing this and this, a bit like a real estate thing. Actually, the social worker is going to be looking at what are those attributes that they have, the capacities that they have about parenting and reparenting children. You know, have they taken on anything extra? Have they got real connections with other children? You know, what experiences have they gone out to do after their approval? Not just that stagnant, oh, we're approved now and waiting. Actually, you've got to be quite active in this.
Scott, can I bring you in here?
Yeah.
Now, it's a while ago. I'm going to read this because your family is ever growing. You and your partner adopted two brothers 9 years ago, it was, I think. And at that time, they were aged 8 and 7. They were
Yeah.
siblings, brothers. And then 2 years ago, you adopted another boy who's now 9. Can you cast your mind back to when you were at the stage that Kathy's at now?
Yeah.
How was that for you, and how did it feel how prescriptive were you about the kind of family that you imagined having with your partner?
We were very prescriptive, actually, and I think it came with some kind of teasing and direction from our social worker who had assessed us, as well as the managers. And bearing in mind, back then, we were the first same-sex couple through our local authority, so it was kind of, it was treading new kind of ground.
How was that?
It was difficult because we were advised that perhaps we should think about a girl rather than boys. And this was 9 years ago, so it's a long time ago now, and things and thoughts have moved on. So
it's been happening.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of change.
So we did settle for when we were thinking about matching. We did think about a girl, and the age range was between 3 and 8. And we did have a vision in our head of what we'd be like, and a little bit like Kathy, adoption was our first choice. Really, we didn't have to, we didn't go through the kind of the natural process of trying for children and surrogacy and what have you. Adoption was first for us. So in our mind, we were happy with what we'd thought was going to be the long-term kind of addition to our family. Yeah, and. I have no reason to say why I wanted a girl. I think it was kind of just drip-fed over the time that we had our assessment of 14 months. It was we were assessed over. So for us, it was more about what we were being informed by the agency. So obviously we were a bit surprised when we actually approached another local authority about a sibling group, older and boys. And we've ended up with 3 of them, so it's quite an alternative. And now, I'm sorry to say, there is no way a girl would fit into our house because there's 5 boys in the house, and it wouldn't be.
I've on the subject of your family of boys, Isla, I think it is, has emailed something for you, Scott.
Okay.
What impact did the arrival of your youngest son have on your family? How did you prepare the older boys for a new boy coming into the fold?
We did a lot of work with them. It was relatively easy in the beginning, and as time has gone on, it's gotten harder actually to facilitate because they are very different as individuals. But I think it's all about patience really, and acceptance as well. Not necessarily reminding the older two of their backgrounds, but a reminder of the younger one's background and why he perhaps displays the emotion or the behaviour that he does, which then can kind of spur on their thoughts about how they were when they were that age as well.
Kathy, if I can move back to you, what kind of support have you had from the agency? You've obviously been busy over the last 18 months, kind of honing this idea of what your family might look like. But what has it been like for you?
I think for me, one of the most important things is the regular contact. So in the main, pretty much 99% of the time, we've had weekly or fortnightly telephone calls, catch-ups and contact, and that's pretty much kept us on track. It's allowed me to just talk through my thoughts. If we get a profile or a PAR, there's always a follow-up call just to talk that through. And actually, my social worker does quite a bit of challenging as well, so she'll challenge some of where my head's at and what I'm thinking about, and that's really, really quite good. I wouldn't necessarily, it hasn't really changed my mind, but it's allowed me to make sure that what I'm thinking through is for the right reasons, really. And also they have supported me. I've had some difficulty getting on like exchange days and activity days, but there's always been the attempt to try and get us on those, and they've had some regional exchange days. Some training courses as well they've managed to set me up on, and some e-learning, which has been really positive.
Have you found out anything? I mean, a lot of adopters say that because it is such a process of learning, and I know the learning doesn't stop at any stage; it continues throughout
Absolutely.
any family. But have you found out things about yourself that perhaps have surprised you in the course of?
Yeah, probably.
That you're happy to share.
I think I've realised that I'm a lot more practical than I probably ever realised. I'm quite pragmatic in my approach, and I'm quite resilient, I think, as well, because I think some of the experiences I've had during the 18 months with potential links and match, I've had to show a level of resilience, which can be some quite difficult times sometimes. And I think the feedback that you would probably say about me is I'm quite grounded. So I've probably learned that really, or it's just been highlighted the importance of that as well.
So you're more capable than you imagined.
I think, yeah.
That's good to know, isn't it? Fantastic.
Yeah, shows out different strengths.
Thanks for that. Scott, back to you. What was times were different certainly when you adopted the brothers. What was your experience of waiting? What was the matching time-wise? How was that for you?
I mean, there's kind of been a lot of kind of debate about this on social media, and I've instigated that conversation, so I've only got myself to blame. But I was really surprised to hear how many people actually, at the same time that we adopted, who experienced a similar kind of way, obviously for different reasons, because, you know, we're in a different world kind of thing in terms of the reasons for that now. But for us, we had to wait that little bit longer. And that was down to, obviously, the fact that we were a male couple, and, you know, it was quite new. But I think for us, the issue was around, whilst we written down on a piece of paper, we said we would like a little girl between the age of 3 and 8. We weren't, when we looked through profiles, we weren't quite so sure about that. So I think that for us, the wait was more about, are we doing the right thing? Is this the right child for us? And, you know, like I say, when the two boys popped up, and, you know, it was just an instant connection before we even chatted to anybody about them. You know, that's what caused our delay, or our wait, if you like. But I would say that the difference between then and now as well, really, is adopters like Kathy, or prospective adopters like Kathy, are able to access a lot more training than you would have been able to back then. And I'm not saying that fills a void, but I think that that's a really good way of being able to kind of think further probably about the kind of child that you'd be willing to kind of consider for adoption. And had we had that kind of training back then, that probably would have made a difference to our kind of naivety about becoming parents as well.
So you felt, in a way, looking back, and probably it was a very different experience when you adopted your youngest son 2 years ago.
Yeah.
You might have had the courage of your convictions. You might have been a little more confident if you'd been supported in training, trusted your instincts.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
And I think that has changed. And I think that adopters these days, and the kind of new approved adopters that are coming through, are, you know, they're a lot more able to kind of access that sort of stuff, whether it be independently or through their agency. So,
Michelle has sent in a question for Kathy. She's single. We should actually at this point explain that you're also a single adopter. You made the decision to adopt as a single person. And Michelle is also single. And she's considering adoption, and she says, have you ever wondered whether being a single adopter has worked against you?
Yes, quite often. I think it's a really valid question, and it's one probably that I'm quite passionate about. I think it shouldn't make a difference. I think probably over the period in time I found that in some instances it has, and I'll kind of elaborate on why that is. I think there's certain children that absolutely, without a doubt, need two parents. And there's also children, I think, that benefit and would flourish with the support and the focus from one. I think where I found it quite difficult at times is because it's so competitive, and that's an awful word to use, but it's so competitive at the moment. If you use like Adoption Link, or there's a child that's available, it's not unusual for them to be 50, even 100 perhaps inquiries for this one child. And I think sometimes you just get an automatic rejection off the back of the fact it's because you're single and we believe that it should be with a couple. And I don't necessarily believe that what they've actually had the opportunity to look at the strengths myself as a single adopter can bring, being an adopted adult, understanding about attachment. And I'm not saying that's across the board, but I have experienced that, and I've experienced it quite directly, where it doesn't say we only want a couple. So it says that they're open to both, but they're then using that as a criteria. So that's quite frustrating. So in that instance, I believe it has had a
You're
detriment.
not being treated as an individual, the assumptions are being made about...
Absolutely, at times. The one bit of advice that I would probably say is absolutely make sure that the social worker that you work with is an advocate of single adopters, because I know full well that the relationship that I have with Coram and the social worker, they would absolutely be able to push through what those strengths are. And sometimes I think there's a frustration there where they're not getting that opportunity to put that forward, because until that link's established, that conversation can't even take place. However, I fully believe that there's many children out there that actually would really benefit from single adopters.
I agree with you. I'd like to ask Joan about this, because you must have assessed hundreds of adopters, couples, singles, all shapes and sizes. What's been your experience of single adopters?
I think it's first worth mentioning that actually the research that's out there regarding single carers does not show any further disruptions or anything. In actual fact, shows exactly as you've sort of said, this highlighting, because a child with attachment issues doesn't have to worry about two people in that relationship. It's just one person, and that makes it much easier for the child. So I think that's quite an important thing that's out there. My experience with single carers is actually they're really very good at making their networks work. And they're, when they're out there, so it isn't just about their current networks, but they are able to go out and make new networks quite happily, because they're confident in that and feel good about that network, and that's part of their own way of socializing, etc. And so in actual fact, there's huge benefits for single carers. And what we also have to remember is many of these children come from single parent families. And this isn't about social engineering. It's really about finding the right placement for a child. And so I do wish that people did have more faith in our single carers.
Here. And Bob, you are single. Who do you turn to for support when you've had a lousy day, when you're understandably frustrated about how slowly things are happening?
I think I'm very lucky. I've got quite a small support network initially, but it's quite robust, and it's been proven in the past. So there's quite a lot of contact with certain members of my friends who can just pick up the phone to and just kind of like download. I also have Sally, the social worker, so she's also support as part of this process.
Have you been lucky enough to have the same social worker for a long time?
I have been lucky to have the same social worker, and I do know that's worth calling out, because sometimes it's about that relationship building element as well. And people at work that know as well. Sometimes people at work ask quite a lot of questions, and actually that's not always the best thing that you should be asking, because it's like saying, when are you going to have a baby? And I'm like, well, I'm approved. You wouldn't ask me when I was going to get pregnant, but they're there, and it's still an element of support there. But there's also, I'll talk about it a little bit now, so just talk to them about what we can do. I've been doing quite a lot of volunteering as well, so I can recognise that just because my support network might be a certain size at the moment, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to continue to be that size, because that support network will grow through contacts that you make at nursery, child clubs, and actually
you're volunteering around children, just to clarify, to gain more experience of being with children.
As I was going through the approval process, I was volunteering at an after-school club and a holiday club. Now, since Christmas, every single week I've been volunteering at a nursery with 0 to 5-year-olds, and I'm spending quite a bit more time in the baby rooms, because that's one of the ages that I didn't have much exposure to. And to me, that is probably one of the main things that I would say, one of the most valuable pieces of work that I'm doing. But the support network piece for me is so important, because your current support network may not be the same support network in 2 years' time, because actually the dynamics will change. Everybody's got their own lives. And
Scott's nodding.
Yeah,
especially when you parent a traumatised child, because a lot of your support network don't actually understand that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, so they run.
Yeah, and I don't want to digress, but I just want to say a little bit about the volunteering as well. Sorry, yeah. A lot of people, I read on the forums, and a lot of feedback that I hear is say, people, I don't need to volunteer, I've got experience of dealing with my cousin's children or my sister's children. I would really say volunteer, because actually that those children, and you don't know the child that you might get placed with, and you don't know some of the challenges that you have. So the more exposure and the breadth of the different types of children you can get exposure to, I just think that that's really, really key.
Yeah, I would agree with that, most definitely.
Yeah.
Is there a danger, Joan, that, I mean, of course, we're going to be steeped in when we're waiting to adopt a child, we're going to steep ourselves in all things adoption. We're going to learn as much as we can. We're going to volunteer. We're going to talk to other people who've been through the experience before us. But is there a danger that we can fixate to the detriment of our own well-being? Is it useful sometimes to try and step back?
I think you do. Just as if when you're a parent, you need to have time to step back and to be your own person and to be an adult. You can't be that enmeshed in it, because it will end up warping your thinking if you're not careful. You're people at the end of the day, and you need to be enjoying life out there. And this is one element that is happening at this point. But if you let it take over, then I think it can be quite damaging to your soul, really.
Yeah.
Scott, you were nodding, not that you're
I'm thinking
What did I say?
confessing to having a damaged soul, I'm sure, but you were nodding through a lot of what Kathy was saying.
Yeah.
It seemed to strike home for you. Have you found that networks of...
Yeah, my network, I mean, whether it's through schools and, all the things that we do with the children, whether it be Cubs or Air Cadets or, those kinds of activities, but also through peer networks as well. So, being involved in adopter groups. Unfortunately, I work for Adoption UK as well as parent 3 adopted children. So it's, my life is probably 95% adoption most of the time.
Adoption at home.
Exactly, yeah. But I find it very therapeutic for myself. Actually, I mean, I organise and run some support groups with Adoption UK, but I don't go there for support for myself. I go there to provide the support to those adopters, and I think the benefits of things like that, especially if it's a targeted support group. So if it is for people who are waiting and waiting on match, and we can bring people together who have the similar or the same experiences. I think that can be really useful. In the same way, LGBT community, they have their own networks, and single adopters as well. So I think that those kinds of things also help to expand your networks, because it is true. Sadly, a lot of your network, well, not a lot of your network, but a lot of networks do diminish over time because of some of the behaviours that you maybe witness with a child who's been traumatised. So I think it's important.
And advice for Kathy and people in her situation, that horrible period of waiting, apart from build a good network?
Yeah. I think for me it would be take advantage of all the training that's out there, if you can access it, and your local authority or agency will fund it, or you can fund it yourself. There's lots of different things from PAC UK, Adoption UK, Quorum even, and there's also independent pieces as well. If I had had that would have kind of not made the wait seem less, but it would have helped in terms of my knowledge, and also perhaps I would have considered other children if I'd had that training to be able to say, yeah, I can look at a child who has this disability or something.
We're almost out of time. We've got a couple of questions. Corin has a question for Kathy. What's been the most helpful piece of advice that you've received? Is it possible to... Or perhaps there are... People are full of advice as well, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So definitely the volunteering, that's without a doubt, because you can read all the books, you can go on the training courses, but until you're actually in the situation dealing with children, even that's not going to prepare you to the extent of when you are actually matched. The second piece of advice is understand your own capabilities. And what you're looking for in a child. And I know there's an element of flexibility that's needed, but don't get persuaded to necessarily look at profiles or needs that are completely outside of what you believe that you can meet, because it's for life, and you're a parent and you are for life. So you're committing to that. You need to be able to give that absolute best start and best life to that child. So I'm not saying don't stick to it rigidly, but I'm just saying just be true to yourself. That's probably the other piece of it. And be resilient, and I could go on with bits of advice.
Thank you.
Stick with it. So.
We are almost out of time, so thank you, the three of you. It's been lovely to, and I'm sure we could have actually gone on for a lot longer, but I want to give the final word as the most experienced adoption professional in the room, making you sound like a venerable old adoption soul, aren't I? I'm sorry. To Joe, for Kathy and for all those other people waiting, is there an overarching piece of advice that you'd like to give or to share?
I think that what I would want people to take away from today is that I'm sad that they're waiting so long in the first place, and thank you so much for being so patient. But please remember that you are so important for these children. I cannot express to you how much growth happens with these children from where they have come from to where they end up in their adoption journey, if we want to say. So please still stay in there with it and hang on. That would be my main thing. And thank you once again for putting yourselves forward.
I think everybody in this room and elsewhere would agree with that. And just finally, good luck, Kathy. And I hope to meet you again soon when your family is a little larger.
Thank you.
Sorry we haven't had time to answer all your questions this evening. There is more information about the matching process and what you can do during this uncomfortable waiting period over on our website, firstforadoption.org.uk. And you can call our information line on 0300 222 0022. Thank you.